Well, here's some really good news, man. I just saw this. You posted something on Instagram that I thought was really interesting that I felt like would be a great conversation, especially for the podcast, that men are flocking to the church in record numbers.
Yeah. What's funny is I just scrolled online and I saw a post. It just popped up on my feed, and New York Times posted this article, something along those lines. Basically, more men are flocking to the church and women are leaving, or something like that. And I wanted to click on it and read more data, but I'm not going to pay to subscribe to New York Times just to read the whole article because I wanted to see where the data is coming from.
I thought the comments were funny.
Yeah. That's the first thing I looked at because it had like thousands of comments, and I'm like, that's what I really want to see.
Yeah.
And not to my surprise, but to a surprise, I guess, so many women commenting on it because the article is about men.
I saw it.
And they're commenting stuff like, well, yeah, it makes sense because, church benefits men and there's a hierarchy. So, of course, men are going to the church more, and women are discovering themselves and starting to leave and not, depend on church and being more independent.
The rise of feminism.
Yes, basically. That's where the culture is going.
The unhealthy idea of feminism, I guess.
Yeah. So I was like, I guess it's surprising, but not at the same time, because that's where the culture is going right now.
So I looked it up on ChatGPT because, like you said, the article was a paid article, and I also didn't want to pay for this. So I just asked Chat, and I referenced that article, and this is what it said. It said, recent research highlights a shift in church attendance patterns, showing that more men than women, particularly among younger generations, are attending religious services. Historically, women were more likely to be involved in organized religion, but this trend is changing, especially within Generation Z. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, young men, although still leaving organized religion, are doing so at a slightly slower pace. This new pattern raises concerns for the church communities that have traditionally relied on women for volunteerism and community building efforts. This is from the Survey Center on American Life. And I think what was interesting is it was telling us why they're leaving the church. And I think the comments were pretty telling in the perspective of women in the church, when it's like, the patriarchy and, we're coming against men in control and women should be in control. And it goes on to say, I'll read it and we can talk about what it says. It says, one key finding is that young women are leaving the church at higher rates than men, which is very sad, and we're going to talk about that. 39% among Generation Z of women identify as religiously unaffiliated, compared to 34% of men. This is a reversal of patterns seen in older generations where women were more religiously engaged. Several factors contribute to this shift. Many young women are increasingly progressive in their views, especially around gender roles. LGBTQ plus, and however many letters they're going to add to that in the future, and reproductive rights, which can clash with traditional religious teaching. So what I think is crazy is, and it's not surprising at all, is the rise of the feminist movement, the rise of the LGBTQ plus agenda, the progressive idea is become such an idol in our world, and women have bought into this, to these lies of the world, this weird obsession with abortion and killing babies and gender roles, that they basically abandon traditional biblical values, which I believe are absolutely necessary for a healthy family.
Yeah, it's crazy because you think about, I guess, our demographic or our generation, for example, because it's always been more women come to the church versus men.
Right.
You always see the single mothers, the grandparents, mothers in general, just women in general, always coming to church more so than men. And now you see a switch where, to a degree, more men are staying in church and women are leaving because of that. So it really makes you wonder, like, what is, causing this? And then you look at data and you go, well, it's like a cultural thing, in my opinion. Because you look at Gen Z, and I was looking at some data. For some reason, when it comes to like this kind of data, I geek out about it. But like for Gen Z specifically, like young adults, Gen Z, a lot of them are having difficulty like expressing themselves in the culture today. And I think church has become a place where they can actually do something like that. Men are finding that particularly. Like, I can actually be myself here, because I think they're probably being encouraged by people around them, churches around them, the pastors around them. Hey, be yourself, man. We accept you for not accept you for who you are, but we welcome you.
It's almost like you have purpose.
Yeah.
And I think what's lacking in the for men today is a sense of purpose, especially like we talked about with the rise of feminism, where it's almost like culture is trying to minimize the importance of masculinity, trying to minimize the importance of men. And it's even happened in the church. I had this conversation with some pastor friends of mine. And we're going to talk about, I guess, some women in ministry stuff. But we were talking about women pastors, co-pastors. Now, I don't believe there's a co-pastor. I think there's a lead pastor, and then there's a pastor's wife who also pastors the church. I just don't see a lot of co-pastors in the Bible. You know what I mean? Maybe they're there. I don't know. You can leave a comment if you have a scripture. But we were talking about this, and I kind of was saying, I think what we've done in an attempt to raise the value of women, which we should do, we've devalued men. And we've come to this point where we're saying, okay, we want to honor women so much that we're going to put them in the position of authority and take that away from a man where that's kind of where it belongs. And so we've titled co-pastors and said these things, and we at the same time as we've been trying to honor women, we've minimized the honor for men. And I think as we see in the data that it's caused men to say, well, I don't really need to be here. I don't belong here. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. And to back that up even more, like Gen Z currently is prioritizing their well-being. Like they're going. So what I've read online from, I believe it's Barna Research Group, Gen Z emphasizes personal well-being, prioritizing happiness, financial stability, and mental, emotional health over traditional life goals like marriage or starting a family. So I think the church comes into play where they're going, when I come to church, it's another part that, helps me out with my well-being, with my happiness. It's a place where I can get, for lack of better words, I don't know what slang Gen Z uses these days, but like positive vibes or something.
Oh, I was going to say, please don't try to use their slang.
I have no idea what their slang is right now, or they're building their aura or whatever they say.
Oh my gosh, dude.
So
I think you just aged yourself, bro.
So Gen Z is the data is showing that they're prioritizing their well-being. So I think that's another indication on why men are coming to the church, because they're going, okay, this is a place where I can, really get into great mental state of mind and be positive about my life. And then you have women, like in the comment section, going, "Oh man, it's only benefits men," but like, unfortunately, just culture has just creeped into their lives, and they're going, I need to be independent. I need to."
Right.
And that's where I didn't really find much data on. I'm trying to figure that out. Why are they, aside from being instructed, like, oh, I need to be more independent stuff? I wonder. It makes me wonder, like, where the church is going wrong in that aspect for Gen Z.
Well, I think it is a cultural issue that men don't really value women and women don't really value men, and where God has ordained there to be unity amongst men and women, and we see it in the scriptures. We see, just because a woman can't lead a church or shouldn't be a lead pastor over a church, that doesn't mean that there's no value in the giftings that the women bring, right? But what we've seen as a society, especially, I guess all over the world, but I think we can see more where we live, is that men have objectified women, right? Women have become for the men of the world, the men of culture, women have become something that they can just enjoy. They become an object to them. And for women, men have become useless to them. They don't want them. They don't want to be led. They don't want to be cared for in that way. They want to do it all themselves. And I think it is this backwards thinking that I love that more men are coming to the church, because as more men go into the church, they're going to begin to learn biblical values. And a biblical value is that men should honor, protect, and love women, right? There shouldn't be this, women are not there to be used by men. Women are there to be honored. They have a gifting within themselves. Hold on, Marcel, send me a text message. Let me see what it says.
On that subject though, so women who's coming to the church for the first time, they're invited, and they are in this cultural mindset where they're like, I need to be independent. I need to be self-reliant. When you approach a church and they teach you, hey, you're honored and cherished by a man that loves you. Like, you date to marry.
Right.
You seek a man with, good morals and stuff like that. How do you speak to them when they're being like told, oh, the church, like that take alone, pastors and women. You think takes like that just rub them the wrong way and just give them even more reason to not go to the church because they go, no, women can't be pastors.
Like, of course. But I think a lot of biblical truth offends people and keeps them from church. Right? So it's almost like saying, should we rephrase what we believe to be true, which is that women shouldn't be lead pastors, so that we, and I think we've done this. And I think that's what I was talking about earlier. I think that's the problem, is we've rephrased it so that we can almost like pretend like, hey, we don't really believe what the Bible writes. Like we do believe it, but we also think there's some wiggle room around it. Like, yes, it's going to be offensive. And so it's almost like when we come to Christ, all of us, right? It's the same thing with husbands and wives. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So you're telling me that I have to love my wife unconditionally no matter how she treats me? Yes. And that's offensive, right? Same thing with men. Men, honor each other. Humble yourself. Put your pride down, right? So at the end of the day, all of us, men and women, are giving up our rights to lead our own life and saying, God, we trust you to lead us. We listen to you. And so is that message offensive? Of course. The problem is not that the message is offensive. The problem is that we as a society are too prideful to submit to the truth of God's word, especially when it comes to these roles that we're speaking on. Because even think about marriage, right? It's like a big thing, like, oh, we are equal. 100%. You are equal to your spouse. You are just as valuable. You carry just as much influence, but the husband should lead the home. Well, why? Because that's what the Bible says. And we found, I wish I could find the research. I don't know if one of you guys want to look it up. If you could find something. I saw something that women that abide by that biblical value are actually more fulfilled. They're more happy with their life. They're more satisfied with their marriage. They're more satisfied with the direction of their life when they submit to biblical values. And it's the same thing for men though too. You know,
No, I agree. I think women unfortunately have deceived themselves by women who preach you have to be self-reliant, you have to be independent, you got to make your own career for yourself. Right. You got to, you got to be your own person. You can't listen to a man. But it's true. Women who end up with the man who leads their home, provides for them, they have a family. It's proven in the data. I don't have the numbers, but I completely understand where you're coming from. Like, they are more satisfied and happy with their life. They want to be with the man who can provide and support them and lead them and guide them and just be that man of God in their life. It's true. The data shows it. It's unfortunate that women are being, I guess, self-deceived by people who are telling them otherwise. It's pretty wild.
I think this is going to be a very offensive episode of the podcast, but I think it's not talked about enough, I don't think. But there's so much good in both, right? In being a leader as a husband and being a submitted wife, right? Now, that doesn't mean that the husband is in full control. That doesn't mean that, I wish that we could come to this conclusion, this understanding that it doesn't devalue women. If anything, it brings more value, saying, listen, as a husband, you are to love your wife. You are to treat her well. You are to honor her. I think the problem that has come into the church, I think, is that men have become obsessive with power, right? And we see this in church authority. We see this whether it's marriage or not. You think, oh, I'm a pastor. That means I'm in charge of your life. And we've had many of these discussions outside of the podcast, obviously, where it's like there are these unhealthy pastors who think they can control every part of your life. Or you want to go on a family vacation, you got to send me an application, a request form, and
an application,
right? I don't know, whatever the process is. You got to send this to me so I can approve your dates. I can approve. Like we've made church authority about control. Therefore, when women look at the biblical values of authority, or when anybody looks at the biblical value of authority, we don't see the value in it. We see the negative aspect when a man takes something that God says and makes it their own, right? So same thing with like a husband. Yes, I'm to lead my home, but that doesn't mean I control my wife, and that doesn't mean I tell her everything she needs to do. That doesn't mean I'm mean and dishonoring and demanding. No, it means I lead my home with the same way Christ leads, with love, with mercy, with honor, with grace, right? And I think if there is a value in understanding that together. Like I think about, and you could probably use the same example, but like me and my wife. If you know my wife, she's so strong-willed. Shout out to you, Jessica, if you're watching. If you're watching, you better be watching this. I hope so. Give me the watch time hours. She is so strong-willed. And in the beginning of our marriage, I was like, you need to submit to me. You need to submit to me. I can't believe you're not listening to me, right? I was so like just shocked that this woman that I married wasn't listening to the Bible. Mm-hmm. But then the Lord kind of checked me and was like, no, you're the issue because you're demanding things of her. You're not honoring her. Mm-hmm. You're not loving her, but you expect her. You're not doing what I'm telling you to do for her, and you expect her to do what I'm telling her to do for you. And it's like it's this backwards thinking that I think men do carry, and that's what probably makes the women say, I don't want to be part of that.
So that's a great example. And this, I don't know, hopefully this isn't off point, but when it comes to that relationship dynamic where the women should be, supportive of the husband, should be receptive, whatever it is they tell them to do, to an extent, I guess. And then they have to honor their husband and all that. And then vice versa with the husband. How do you build that up into, or how do you even preach that to men and women who are turned off by church? How do you even incorporate that into their life?
I think anything biblical, anything righteous, you're never going to receive it until you have a life-changing encounter with God, right? Because the Bible says that the things of the Spirit are foolish to those who are in the flesh, right? So if you go to a women's march, right, in somewhere in, let's say Austin does something, you start preaching, God says to do this, all the women are gonna be like, who are you? You're foolish. I'm never gonna do that. That's dumb. That's crazy. But why? Because they're not in the Spirit. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the man. Like, what's crazy is that if you were to tell a married man, like, hey, you shouldn't be watching pornography, that's cheating on your wife, millions of excuses, right? Oh, it's not cheating. It's not, I'm not really doing anything. Everybody does this. Why? Because the spiritual guidance of the Lord, the spiritual guidance of the Bible is foolish to those who are in the flesh. So you can't like teach that. You can't just make somebody understand that and it goes back to the thing that we're all doing is surrendering and submitting ourselves to the teaching of God's word and to the guidance of His Spirit and saying, you know better than me. Mm-hmm. Your ways are higher than mine. So I think it's absolutely going to take a spiritual transformation in somebody's heart, which I think that's why I celebrate that more men are going to church these days.
Yeah. So going back to that topic of more men coming to the church, do you think ultimately this benefits society better? Like overall as a 100%. Whole, does it just benefit everything?
Absolutely. I think we went to church together. We grew up together in church. Prayer meetings for years was like me and my pastor and a room full of women. Like that was a prayer meeting, right? It was a couple of the men that were leading, but majority was women. Mm-hmm. It's not because they were at work. It's because they were at home sleeping or doing something, right? Some of them were at work. Okay, yeah. Don't get offended. But over time, you start to see more men come to church. You start to see more men come to prayer. Mm-hmm. And even in our church here, like I noticed that there was a switch. There's something flipped because it went from women at the altar worshiping to men at the altar worshiping. Mm-hmm. And there was one Sunday we had where it was all men at the altar worshiping. There was no women, which was weird because in my growing up in church, it's always been the women serving. It's always been the women leading spiritually. It's always been the women praying. It's always been the women worshiping. And so I think it is an amazing thing because men should lead in that area. Mm-hmm. I've always challenged the men to do that.
Yeah, I think it's great that, I know we don't have necessarily all the data at our fingertips right now to tell each other, yeah, definitely more men in the church. I know some people are probably going to say, well, there's a lot of women in my church and stuff, but yeah. I think it's a great thing to see because I personally think if there was no church, me going to church at my age, now being Gen Z age,
right,
was very beneficial for me. Like, I can't imagine myself not going to church and being who I am now. Mm-hmm. Like, even faith aside, men imparting into me and telling me, you got to live right. Like, not even sin aside, just like, don't do wrong.
Yeah.
Be a provider for your wife.
Don't be lazy.
Yeah, don't be lazy. Work hard. Like, those values alone would not have made me who I am today. Mm-hmm. It's very beneficial for young men, especially, to be receiving of those values because ultimately later in life, you end up going, man, these principles really benefited me. Like, I'm able to actually now provide for my wife because I worked hard. I'm now able to be a good husband, a good leader for my wife and kid because the principles that were instilled into me.
Which were biblical principles.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I think I love Mark Driscoll. He had a lot of heat on him for a little bit.
Oh yeah.
But I started listening to some of the stuff that he says. And Mark, if you're ever going to see this, come on the podcast. They imagine this is the one that gets him.
That's funny.
Anyway,
he's very controversial.
One can dream, right? Okay, so Mark Driscoll, his message to the men, and he's got a great men's ministry. I love that guy. But he said something like, get married young, buy land and have kids. Right? Like that was his thing. Like get married young, live somewhere right, get a house, get property, and have kids, like build a family. And I think that message is so simple and it's so counterculture to our world. Our world says don't get married, sleep around, right? Don't have any kids, keep everything to yourself. And I think there's something that happens to a man when he steps into his rightful place, when he steps into his rightful calling, which I think, like I'm a pastor and I think still the greatest calling of my life is a father and a husband, right? That's a bigger responsibility than pastoring a church, right? And so I think we all have this greater calling as men that if we continue to go down a path where we don't want men to, we build church for women and not for men, then we're not going to allow men to step into their rightful place. And here's interesting. Here's some more interesting data on this topic here. It says research suggests that when a husband or father when a husband or father begins attending church regularly, the likelihood of the entire family following suit increases significantly. According to the studies, when a father attends church, about 93% of families will also attend, compared to around 17% when only the mother attends.
Yeah.
So think about it. So is it good that more men are going to church? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like this could potentially shift generations. Shift generations. Think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can attest for myself. I didn't grow up with a father, but even like me making the decision to attend, now my family, now I instill that to them, like, let's go to church. And that in itself, just going to church alone, I think will benefit them tremendously. Even, I know this is different subject, even if they're not being imparted to, even if they're not like really, even if they're being rebellious about going to church, like, they will benefit just from going to church alone,
right.
and God will do the work. Like he'll do it. Yes, I'm supposed to lead my home. Yes, I'm supposed to go ahead and lead my wife and son to the Lord. But the church itself, like the Lord will take care of that. Like that alone will benefit them tremendously.
Well, like you said, you get biblical values, you get some good mentors. Like there's so many benefits to the church, and so I do think it's a good thing that men are flocking to the church, that those numbers are changing. I believe that's probably the start of some revival that God is bringing to our nation that is desperately needed. And the world has gone so crazy one way, the left and progressive ideas that are really anti-men. There's anti-masculinity. I mean, the leaders of those movements are all so feminine and it's a good thing. I think it's really turned men off to that movement. Say, man, I don't want to be part of that. Like I want to have a beautiful wife and amazing kids, and that's why, because that in all of us, like I feel like that's the higher calling. Like that is what we've been created for is to lead, right? And there are proper roles in the church and in marriage that we must embrace, that we have to allow to guide our lives. But I think the question then comes, okay, well, what can we do better so we don't lose more women, right? Because it is good that more men are coming, but it's terrible that women are leaving. I don't think that's good.
So how do we get those women to flock back to the church when they believe it's a hierarchy?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like you'd have to ask a woman that, right? I think we have to continue to learn how to value women. There are some churches that do a great job.
How do you, in your church, you're a pastor of a church, how do you do that?
Let's cut the podcast. No, I'm kidding. I think it's allowing, just as you would men, allowing women to express the giftings that they have, right? It's positioning women in a place where they can have influence and carry influence. There's definitely women in our church who are very gifted, and who me and my wife specifically have chosen to invest in because there's something on their life. There's a calling and a gifting on their life that God wants to use. And we feel like it's valuable that we invest in that. And I think that it's going the other way because, again, there's some churches that will say, well, women should remain silent in church and women should not do anything in church. They shouldn't be on a microphone. It's funny because you look in the New Testament and women were prophesying, they're teaching, they're doing all these things. And yet for us, we're like, no, that's unbiblical. It's like, it's happening. What are you talking about? It literally happens in the Bible. And so I think finding that balance of honoring both men and women, putting them in positions to succeed, putting them in positions to be empowered, putting them in positions to have influence, but still following biblical values, right? And I think if you continue to do that, you're going to see women being honored, and they're going to want to be a part of that. You know, like I know there's a great church out here called Mercy Culture, which I'm pretty sure you've heard of it. Pastor Landon and Heather Schott. And what I love about that is that they honor women in ministry, and it's stirred up the hearts of women to go to the church to be a part of it because they honor them. And I think we can do ourselves a disservice by trying so hard to honor women that we don't honor men, and trying so hard to honor men that we don't honor women. There has to be a blending. There has to be a balance of that. I mean, Jesus did a great job, right? He had his disciples, yet he chose women to be the first ones to see him or to hear about the good news, right? So I think we need to learn how to do that, is what I would say.
Yeah, and that goes back to the original point I made where many Gen Z members, especially young adults and women, feel held back from fully expressing their true selves. And I think the church is a perfect place to do that. Reach Church is a great place to do that because women and men come to a church and they go, oh, I actually have a voice. I'm actually appreciated here.
Right.
Like they put me in a position where I can serve. Whereas another church, they required me to come to a church for 5 years and go to seminary, and then now I can serve and be a greeter.
Right. You have to go to seminary to be a greeter.
That's a big. Never mind. But that goes back to me saying people just want to be able to express themselves. Right. People want to be able to have a voice and be heard and just have given some kind of, not authority, but given some kind of role in the church where they go, oh, I matter at this church.
Right.
Me doing something actually matters at this church.
But I think too is honoring again, like we talked about, the greater calling and the greater gifting. I don't know where we've come to this place where we think like a stay-at-home mom is undervalued, right? Where it's like, oh, it's better that you're a CEO of a company or that you make a ton of money not to be a stay-at-home mom.
Goes back to the feminist movement.
Right, it does. And I think maybe the church should do a better job of highlighting those gifts. I mean, mothering children is one of the most world-changing, impactful things that you can ever do. And we've come to a point where we're like, oh, you know, that's not as important as something that we do on the stage, something we do on the microphone. And I think maybe that's where we get things mixed up. We've honored certain positions over some other positions that are very important. How can you honor mothers more? How can you honor women more in that role? But I think it's the same thing with fatherhood, right? We've taken these roles that God has given us, these responsibilities that God has given us, these children that we have to steward, and we've made them burdens and not blessings, right? We've made them, we've made them add more chaos to our life. And it's like, no, this is the calling. Like you're literally raising the next generation. And so how do we honor women more? I think we honor mothers more, right? Mother's Day, you know, take that time to honor women. I always joke around with the church and say, you know, Father's Day is the most important day that we celebrate. But I think that maybe the church should do a better job of honoring women in the calling that God has given them. That's one of the greatest callings ever.
It makes me wonder if, aside from like this feminist movement where you have to be independent and, you know, provide for yourself, it makes me wonder if these women have just gone to like a really bad church. Like they're just the pastor or leadership or something just turned them off to where they're like, this isn't right. This isn't healthy. And then they go, I'm going to leave and, you know, not depend on a God. I'm not going to depend on a person or man. It makes me wonder if they just went to a really bad church.
I think I don't want to say any. I think a lot of bitterness is pretty much rooted in hurt and trauma, right? So women that don't want to be with men have probably experienced a really bad relationship. Women that don't want to go to church have probably experienced a really bad culture of leadership. Same thing with men and their issues, right? So I think that it's a matter of I think you're right. It's definitely what you've gone through and how that affects your life and how that affects your perspective. And our prayer is that God still moves in their life and that God still touches them. You know, women are so impactful. Women make such a big difference in the kingdom of God. I mean, just read through the scriptures. You know, just read what God has done through women. Mm-hmm. And I actually changed my stance on women in ministry. I never really talk about it. I don't like to talk about it that much. Mm-hmm. But for me, I used to be kind of that guy that was like, man, women shouldn't be preaching and they shouldn't, what is this? This is ungodly. I'd always like make jokes and like, you know, like, well, what does Paul have to say about this? You know? Uh-huh. And I took some time to just really pray about it because I never really like to present a solid thought or like a landing thought unless I've really studied it. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I took some time. I prayed about it. I read, I studied, and I just felt the Lord working in me. And I remember this one time I went to a conference or a pastor's thing, and I was still there. I was like, man, women shouldn't be doing this.
So a woman was preaching when you were there?
So check this out. Yeah. So it was a husband and wife, and they're like, hey, this morning, I forget her name. She's actually a really good preacher.
Say her name, dude.
I don't remember it. If I remembered, I would say it. Okay, well, let me back up. So beforehand, I'm listening to a podcast from the upper room, mm-hmm. and it's a woman preaching the word that Sunday. And I was like, well, let me just hear it, right? Let me just see how it is. And dude, it was one of the most amazing messages I've ever heard. And I was mm-hmm. like, all right, God, okay, you can use anybody, all right. Mm-hmm. But it's still kind of wrestling with that. So I go to this conference, the woman steps up, and I'm literally in my seat, and I'm like, I'm just gonna go to the bathroom. You know, like I'm gonna take the next 45 minutes. I'm gonna go to my room and just kind of rest. It was all my pride.
And you walked into the restroom, a bunch of men are in there.
They're like, oh, you're here too, doing a Bible study. No. So I stood in the service, and she's speaking, and she starts talking about something I just read, 3 days ago, and she starts basically bringing out the points that God had spoken to me in the message through the word, and I started getting like choked up as she's speaking. And you know me, I'm not a big crier. I started getting choked up. I'm like, dang, like God, you're really speaking to me through this woman, and that's where you convicted me. He's like, I can use anybody. Mm-hmm. Like, who are you to say who I can and cannot use? And I think that shifted my thought process on when it comes to women in ministry. Mm-hmm. Even women pastors, although I don't think that's the most effective way in my own opinion, mm-hmm. but who are we to say who God can't use? Who are we to say who God, oh God, you can only use this gender to do these jobs and the other gender to do the other jobs. And I think if we have this understanding that God honors and can use anybody he chooses to, then that will cause us to give honor to others. And it will cause us to honor men and women, say we are all valuable to God in some way. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a matter of gender. I think it's a matter of surrender, right? Who is willing to surrender to God and say, Lord, just use me as you please. And I think that's the person that God uses.
So what are your thoughts on women? I know I completely agree with you when it comes to women who minister, women who preach, like in an evangelistic ministry. Like I see those women all the time, mm-hmm. like on YouTube and stuff like that. Some of them have a great word, some a great message. But what about when it comes to women who are like actually pastoring and leading a church and not the man?
My personal opinion on this is I don't think it's biblical. But again, I tell people this all the time. I've not studied this part, like for that question, I've not studied this whole topic to the extent to where I'm like, I know for sure. Mm-hmm. And even then, I feel like nobody knows for sure anything, right? There's so many things that God does and the way that he does it. But my personal opinion is I wouldn't go to that church. I don't think that is right. I think that a man should lead. And the reason I think that is because God made Adam first and then Eve, and God called the man to be the head of the household, not the woman. That is all biblical. And so I think if you look at God's patterns and the way that he sets up systems, it's usually a man leading, right? And so I wouldn't say that's biblical, but it goes back to what I said earlier. Who am I to say who God can and cannot use? If there's a woman leading a church, do I think it could be effective? Probably. Mm-hmm. If she lets the Holy Spirit move, God can do whatever he wants, right? So I don't think it's biblical. I don't think it's right. But at the same time, I wouldn't say like if there's a woman pastor, I wouldn't say, oh, you're a false prophet, you're not of God, and you're living in sin, and everybody should leave this church. I just wouldn't do that. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's right.
I'm curious to know if those churches where there's a women pastor, like they're like the face of the church.
Right.
I'm curious to know if like more women who are like in that or have a background of just being a feminist, like are more attractive to those churches.
Probably. I mean, you would think so, right? It's relatable. It's you know, but it's the same thing with like a Mark Driscoll, who's very manly and very, you know, that probably attracts a lot of men who are like that. And so, but again, it would go into the question: well, isn't that a good thing? Like, isn't it good to have environments that are, I don't even want to say what I'm going to say, but have a church that's attractive to people, that as long as they're preaching the gospel, as long as they're preaching the truth, what's wrong with that? You know what I mean? So I don't know.
You're a big Mark Driscoll fan, huh?
I'm actually not that big, but
I was going to ask you because you brought it up. I'm not going to say it. What do you think about him like smoking cigars and like drinking whiskey?
Oh my gosh. I wouldn't do it. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't do that stuff. But a man who does it, again, it's one of those things where I'm not going to say, oh, that he's drinking alcohol. Oh, he's a sinner. He's going to hell. He has a cigar. He's going to hell. Like, that's not, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I don't do it. I don't think it's right, but thanks for that question though. I appreciate that.
I don't know if you want to get into the questions and answers.
Yeah, let's get into some questions. Well, hold on. We have a question from our live audience here in the room.
Oh, you're talking about Marcel?
Yeah.
The guy behind the camera?
The guy behind the camera. Has the rise of influencers caused women to seek empowerment over traditional roles? Why don't you come on and answer that? Just kidding. Has the rise of influencers caused women to seek empowerment over traditional roles?
I think to an extent, yeah, because you see it on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. You see it all the time. Like you see women being entrepreneurs, being the CEOs of companies, getting promoted and stuff. And I think it does, but it also happens with men too. Like you see like just men influencers like Andrew Tate's and like all that type of stuff. Like you see that and they're promoting like you got to be like an alpha and all that. That's probably a really bad
example of masculinity.
Yeah,
right?
but you see, but like just to make my point, like you see women on that spectrum like saying all that stuff. You see men on that spectrum saying all that stuff. So to an extent, yeah, like it does play a huge role in like where, because women are receiving and men as well are receiving a lot of their information from their phone.
Yeah.
So it does definitely creep into like their nature and their culture and their way where they get information on how they should be. Like, of course it plays a role, I think.
I think it just creates opportunity, right? People see it's possible and they want to do it. I think that one of the issues that influencers and even like social media and YouTube and all that, one of the issues I think is that people just want platform. They don't really want ministry. Like they don't really want to do something for God. It's more about, I want people to know me. I want people to know my name. And I think that's bad all across the board, whether it's a man or a woman. But I do wonder if women stepping into these things or men being distracted by these things, have we at the same time abandoned the roles that are more important? Like husband, like wife, like father, like mother, right? Have we abandoned those things in the pursuit of a worldly dream? And I wonder if maybe that is the issue.
I think a lot of women are abandoning that, unfortunately, especially as you see in the data, like just more men wanting to stay, women wanting to leave. I think you end up, or you're going to get a large result of women being alone because they wanted to chase a goal or dream where this person told them, you got to be self-independent. Right. You got to, achieve your goals, go to school, do all this and be self-sustainable. But I think we're going to find a lot of women. I don't have any data yet, but I think we're going to find a lot of women who are just lonely as they get older and go, man, I should have, not been so driven by this culture that tells me I need to be self-independent. And now don't have a husband. I don't have any kids. And that's something I think women actually truly desire.
I think we're going to find that in men and women. There'll be a lot of lonely people at the end of their life because they refuse to surrender their life to somebody else. And I think that kind of goes down to the basis of what we're speaking about is these roles in gender, right? These roles with men and women, these giftings and all that. There are roles, there are biblical ways of doing things, there are great giftings that everybody carries. But at the end of the day, our life is meant to be selfless, right? So a man doesn't want to get married to a woman doesn't want to marry a man. It really comes down to this idea that I want to live life the way I want to live it. I don't want to give up for anybody else. I mean, you even have like these women who are proud that I'm 40 years old, single with no kids, and it's great. And I'm just like, dude, what a selfish life. Like what a life that it's, oh, I can sleep in whenever I want. I can go party. I don't have to get a baby. I'm just like, dude, you're selfish. You're such a selfish person. And even men that are like that, I'm not gonna have any kids. You know, like I'm not gonna ever get married. I'm gonna be with all these women. It's like, dude, you're just selfish. You're selfish. And I think what's happening in the church, and I think the reason men are coming in record numbers, as we're talking about, is because they're realizing there's something more to my life than just being about me. There's something more to my life than just being single and being alone and sleeping around. There's something more. And I'm praying and hoping that this is a spark to revival. I mean, think about what happened when Jesus came. He got men's attention. He got the attention of men. And they're saying, man, we want to follow you. And he gets to this point, I think it's in John chapter 6 or Luke chapter 6. I'm pretty sure it's John, where everybody leaves Jesus and he goes to Peter. He's like, are you guys going to leave too? And Peter's like, where the heck are we going to go? You know, like, we've given everything to you. And I think there's something so powerful that happens when men step into the calling that God has called them. And all the women that are leaving, what I think will happen is they're going to see these women are going to see quality in men again, because men are now stepping into biblical lifestyles. And when women see the men with quality and integrity and character, it's going to be attractive to women, and there'll be a revival in the churches and in families. So let's get into some questions. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
No. I was going to say that's good.
No, say it.
No, I didn't. I didn't have anything. I was going to say, let's go to the next question.
All right. How much time we got? We good? All right. How can you encourage young men in your congregation to take a more active role in both attending and leading within your church? How can you encourage young men to take an active role in leading and attending?
Well, I think going back to what I said earlier, like the data shows right now they feel like they're being held back from expressing themselves. So I think when you...
Well, what do you mean by... What is that? Expressing yourself in what way?
The data says like they don't feel like they can be themselves. They don't feel like they can actually, connect with other people and actually display who they really are and what they care about, what they're really into. But I think when you have young men or just people in general, when they go to the church, you allow them and you create opportunity for them to be heard. So whether that's going to youth groups, hanging out with people of their demographic, when it comes to older men, hanging out with other older men of their demographic, but then over time letting them know that they have a voice where they can actually impart into others as well. Like, hey man, you've been coming to church for a year or two now. Like, understand, like, you have a testimony. You can talk to people now. You can minister to other people. Like, your voice is powerful. Like, you can minister to other men your age and impart into them, letting them know that they actually carry something now that they've been coming to church, now that they've encountered the Holy Spirit. They carry something. Right. I think that's how we can reach not only young men, but young women as well.
I think we need to do a call to sacrifice again. My opinion is we've made church way too soft, and men don't want to be part of it because it's soft. There's no sacrifice. There's no discipline. There's no accountability. There's not like this. I think one of the most exciting things about the call of God is like, dude, it's an adventure. It's a crazy adventure. You don't know what it's like. I think men, we all have this natural tendency to want to explore, to want to live a life of maybe a little bit of chaos, and want to have this. We don't want this comfortable, easy life all the time. I think there's this pursuit of something greater. And I think the church has kind of made the call, the gospel, we've kind of made it soft. And we made, hey, just come to church and be a good person. And it's no longer like, hey, sacrifice your life, be a vessel of God, and he could take you anywhere. Like, you don't know what your life will look like. So I think what can make church attractive is not the call to ease, but the call to sacrifice, the call to a greater adventure. I think that would be my answer to the question. All right, let's go to the next one. What steps can churches take to address the concerns of young women leaving the church? How do we fix that problem?
Going back, it's going to sound repetitive again. Letting women know that they're heard, letting them know that they have a role in this church, in a church. They have a role here. Their life matters. Let them know that if you've been to a church where you felt like there was a hierarchy, like, let them know, hey, that's not necessarily us. Yes, we believe as a wife you should submit to your husband, but we're not here to rule over your life and control everything. Like, we want you to serve here. We want you to feel empowered to, lead other women as well, impart into them, speak into their lives. You can be you here to an extent. Obviously, you can't be.
Yeah, well, I get what you're saying. It's not like come as you are, stay as you are.
Yeah,
you are welcomed as you are, but God has greater things for you, and that requires change.
Correct.
But I think what you're saying, how do we attract more women to the church? I do agree. I think it's this idea of honoring women, honoring their gifts, honoring their talents, honoring the incredible life they live, the incredible abilities they have, and not being so centered on this manly authority in an unhealthy way where it's about, I'm in charge, you listen to me. But it's, again, you lead how Jesus led, with grace, with humility, with honor. And it's just like, hey, yeah, we are leading you, but your voice matters in this leading process, right? It's kind of like with me and my wife. Yes, I'm leading my home, but I'm not going to go buy a house without asking her. You know what I mean?
Correct.
I'm not going to go spend our money on something dumb and just be like, oh, like you got to follow me. I'm the boss. No, there's conversation. There's
partnership,
unity. There's partnership, and I think you honor that. I think as you honor that, it attracts women. And I think another thing is you have healthy men, and you have healthy leaders with integrity and character, where it's like we are not predators. If you have men that are predators around, of course, no woman's going to want to come. But you protect women, you protect children, and I think that's attractive. I mean, I would think that's attractive to women.
Yeah, I don't think this message alone, this topic alone, is not really something that you see like on your feed, like on your YouTube or whatever. I think if more women heard this and found out, like, oh wow, the man does honor me, a man does value me for who I am, like, they do see worth in me. I think the more women get to receive that message and hear it, I think they'll be less turned off by the church and go, man, there is a place for me to go to. And that is something that I'm not used to. Whereas society tells them, no, you gotta be you. Like, be different.
It's the same call. It's men and women. It's a call to abandon yourself. That's the call that Jesus has. Right? So whatever ideologies you have or opinions you have on gender roles and how we should platform men or women or anything like that. We don't come to Jesus and say, okay, this is my idea of what it should look like. I'm going to follow you, but it has to follow this. We come to Jesus and say, listen, everything that I thought, everything that I think is right, everything that I think is the way it should be, I'm surrendering that to you because I need you to change me. You know better than I do. Your ways are higher. Your thoughts are higher. Like you're smarter than me. I surrender that to you. It's like, you ever see Happy Gilmore?
Yeah.
Remember when he, do you remember that scene where he is Chubbs, his coach?
I don't remember it that well, but I've seen it.
Anyway, he comes to Chubbs and he basically, Chubbs is trying to help him. He ignores him and he leaves, and then he comes back for help and he goes, I was wrong, you were right. I'm stupid, you're smart. I'm ugly, you're good looking. And I feel like when you come to Jesus, it's kind of like that, whether you're man or woman, you come and say, I don't know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing. My ways are low, your ways are high. Like, so I don't think it's if it offends women, it should offend men too. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts are not right in comparison to God's. Mm-hmm. Period. Your ways are ridiculous. They're foolish in comparison to God. Mm. So we come, all of us, this is what I think a husband should be. It doesn't matter what you think a husband should be. What does God think a husband should be? This is what I think a wife should be. It doesn't matter. What does God think? This is what I think women should do in church. It doesn't matter what you think or what you want. This is what God says. This is what I think a man should do. It doesn't matter, right? So it's this, I think what's going to attract the world to Jesus is preaching the true gospel. Abandon yourself. Mm-hmm. And so, but I think we still need to find and be able to communicate that we honor men and women. So I celebrate that more men come to church, and I pray that the women stop leaving, and I hope that men lead correctly. All right?
That's
Amen. Good. What a good sermon today, huh?
I receive it.
You receive it? Altar call. Come to the altar. Come to the altar. Hey, listen, if you enjoyed this podcast, if you enjoyed this content, make sure you like the podcast. Leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. If you have a disagreement with, I'm sure you're going to disagree with Ruben. If you do, leave a comment below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notifications so that you can be notified. We release a podcast just like this every single week, and we got some great guests coming on pretty soon. None greater than Ruben, though, so we celebrate that he's with us. But make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys next time.